Hello guys, how's it going? My name is Dalrin. Many of you have asked me to do a video on Death Row Above, an ability a lot of us rogues love. So this video is exactly what you guys asked for, a Death Row Above video. So the purpose of today's video is to take a look at the ability of Death Row Above and see if we can bring it back to Legion. Currently Death Row Above isn't really played by that many players, and most of the high-end PvP builds for all three specs do not involve Death Row Above. But we can take a look at Death Row Above, see how we can apply it, especially to the spec of Subtlety, which I think combos pretty well with it, and see if it's viable and if it has any validity at all. Maybe for casual PvP, maybe for some serious high-rate PvP. Who knows? But what I have for you guys is 2 different builds with 2 different BG footages where I was able to maximize my damage utilizing Death Row Above and showcase you guys exactly how strong the ability is to let you decide and judge for yourselves whether you want to be using it or not. So let's get to the video. Death Row Above is a very interesting ability, and for any rogue that played through Warlords of Draenor, all of us will remember just how cool that ability was. I feel like it was one of the most iconic rogue abilities in a very long while. It had a very interesting looking animation until Demon Hunters came around, so then doing backflips in the air became kind of a common thing in WoW. Let's take a look at the ability to see if it's any different from what it was back in Warlords of Draenor. And we're going to be applying this for Spec of Subtlety, but if you just replace the finisher at the end, you can apply the same thing for Outlaw with Run Through and then Venom for Assassination. Death Row Above is an ability that's a 2-part finisher. First, you have the AoE concept of it, where you leap in the air, first of all dealing physical damage, a moderate physical damage in PvP, to everybody around you, and then you slam down your target with your finisher damage, be it spec specific. So for Outlaw it'd be Run Through, for Assassination would be in Venom, and Subtlety gets the beefy Eviscerate. So that's the big part about the ability, is it increases the damage of your Eviscerate, and it's kind of like a 2-part finisher with some mobility aspect to it and some CC immunity during your backflip. At least back during Warlords of Draenor, that was one of the bigger concepts on it. It was kind of cool when you could DFA a paladin who's about to hodge you, and bam, there you go. The paladin has no way to set up on you, and now you don't need to burn your trinket. Now the ability itself isn't as powerful as it was. Now it only deals 25% more damage for your finisher. It used to deal 50, but in PvP it is 25%. And I believe that this change was made back during the beta when everybody as a Subtlety rogue rolled the beefy one-shot build where you could deal 1 million damage and over, especially if you crit, with DFA. But I believe the problem was not DFA, it was simply just how much damage or how much solid damage Subtlety was able to put out with DFA or without. Currently DFA isn't used in any of the 3 specs of Rogue. There are 3 specs of Outlaw, Assassination, Subtlety, and all of them have a few different builds. I know that Subtlety has one build in particular that most people use, a very sustained build with a lot of Shadow Strikes, Nightblades, and Eviscerates, and currently DFA just doesn't really fit into that build currently, or I haven't seen that many people that even given it an attempt. But I will be doing this in this video, and this are some of the clips of me trying it out. Short and simple, it doesn't quite fit as well as Master of Shadows. One of the advantages of Master of Shadows is the fact that it gives you back energy, and this build revolves around spamming your abilities. DFA does come in with a little bit of damage in terms of setups, but very quickly without Master of Shadows to be able to fuel your energy whenever you are short, you do run out of energy, so you end up running out of steam. So it's kind of like playing the good old build that most of you guys do as Subtlety rogues, but you eventually run out of steam, which is the weird part about it. The fact that you just simply run out and that's it, you have no energy, you kind of have to wait, is an odd concept, especially if you've been playing Subtlety just about every single day in Legion. I know that I haven't been given Subtlety that much love to play it every single day, but I get used to the good old build of spamming Shadow Strikes, Eviscerates, and Nightblades back to back to back, so then throwing a DFA gives me a little bit of adrenaline rush whenever I go up in the air, but then for the most part it kind of just meh. I didn't really feel it. I thought that maybe there's some kind of a better build that could be run with it. I was thinking maybe there's some kind of DFA specific build that could be done with this. I mean, Death Row Above gives you opportunity for one of your biggest damaging abilities, your Eviscerate, to deal the most amount of damage possible So maybe there's some ways of comboing together. So after playing around with the good old build plus the DFA wombo combo, which I found kind of fun, and it is actually pretty viable in BGs because for the most part Subtlety already deals decent damage, and now you simply are just tagging on an ability that increases one of your biggest hits in the game to deal a little bit more damage at a sacrifice of energy. Basically means that as long as you're not really being dumb with your energy resources and energy use, as long as you're watching out for your energy and a little bit extra cautious in terms of your combo points, you should be just fine. Which I'm pretty sure in Legion with the prune that happened in the game, a lot of rogues can do that a lot easier compared to previous expansions. So then the idea is to make a whole another build just for DFA, just to see if it can suit it. My thoughts were deal as most amount of damage as possible combined together with Shadow Dance. So we are going to make Shadow Dance a ability that boosts your damage. So then you can kind of go in for an all-in wombo combo. Prior to that, you do want to set up Finality, which DFA does benefit from. So you want to set up Finality for your Eviscerate, and then use that Finality Eviscerate through your DFA. And bam, you should get the most amount of damage. You'll have Finality damage increase, you'll have whatever buffs you can get for Shadow Dance damage increases, and should be cool for one shot. So that is the next thing that I tried, because the original build didn't really work all that well, so we're gonna try something new, and this is the best build I came up with. I know a lot of you are gonna say in the comments, oh, Dalaran didn't choose to take Thieves Bargain. Thieves Bargain, I'm still wearing the tinfoil hat with a pretty firm belief that the 20% damage increase does not work. So instead we're going to be using something more reliable. We're going to be going with Night Stalker just to make sure that we get every little bit of damage increase. Trust me, it does not really mess with the video if we aren't going for Thieves Bargain, as you'll see with the end of the video my final conclusions. So let's check out that build. I decided to take it even a step further with Deeper Stratagem just to maximize every little bit of damage, and I actually got a pretty good BG on the live stream where we were able to test this damage of mine with DFA in a more realistic PvP situation with all the players present, so I can test out my damage on tanks, on healers, on clothies, on plate. So I got to hit a lot of people with DFA, just smacking them around. Off the bat, I did notice that the damage increase is there for a lot of my abilities, because every time I'm in Shadow Dance, I am dealing a little bit more damage. I have together Master Subtlety for 10% damage increase, Night Stalker for 12% damage increase. I also have Symbols of Death for 20% damage increase, so that's like, what, 40% damage increase? Or, I mean, it depends how Blizzard does the math, which is either multiplicative or additive. I never figured that out. But when you think about it, on average, a Subtlety rogue is running around with at least 30% damage increase at all times. So I guess even if Thieves Bargain does do some kind of a DPS increase, I can definitely see why I would notice it, because you are already rolling with a passive 30% damage increase, and it feels like you don't deal insane damage, you know, together with Master of Subtlety and with your Symbols of Death, but it's just such a weird concept. Anyway, I digress. Let's talk a bit more about Subtlety in the build. So going for DFAs, my DFAs definitely do deal a lot more damage, but so do other abilities. Actually, in fact, the most amount of damage I've gotten out of the BG in terms of my abilities were actually my juicy Shadow Strikes, which we were hitting for way over 100k a pop. So most of my damage came from that. The other third portion of my damage came from my Nightblades, as expected, because Nightblades are a very, very powerful tool for Subtlety in terms of slows, but especially in terms of damage. The amount of damage you deal with Nightblade is pretty impressive. So altogether, with this build, I'm able to deal more damage, but not from the sources where I was thinking about. I was trying to do everything, line up a perfect cheap shot stun into a full 6 comp point DFA with Finality set up ahead of time, making sure that I have a charge of Shadow Dance. And the damage increase of DFA was definitely there. It was a little bit higher than my average Eviscerate for certain, but it just wasn't as high as I expected. I expected like some 600k hit non-crit, and if it crits maybe 800k, that would be very, very exciting, because I was kind of trying to recreate old Subtlety rogues with where if you crit you actually take off a considerable chunk of enemy's health. But what turned out to be is I feel like the Spec of Subtlety is just not built for burst kind of damage anymore. I feel like back in the day, literally any other expansion ago, Subtlety was more geared towards dealing as much damage as possible to enemies, and the whole playstyle of the Spec, as well as the concentration of damage, just simply went towards your sustain based abilities. So a lot of your damage, and as it's seen from the Skada, your recount or whatever the hell you want to use, I did do most of my damage from my Shadow Strikes and Nightblades. Eviscerates were definitely a considerable portion, but if Eviscerates were, let's say, 50% of my damage, like some crazy increase, I could definitely see it. But even as I'm going for some crazy all-in build, the fact that my Shadow Strikes are getting a lot more damage output in the long run, that my beefy Eviscerates feels a little bit weird and awkward and kind of makes me want to stop playing the build altogether. But it's still something fun for you to use. I do not believe that you should spend any time changing your spec specifically for DFA. That's one of the things that I learned with the secondary build. There's no big point because I don't think there's going to be any talent that will 100% influence how DFA specifically functions. I honestly do not believe it. And that really goes back to subtlety in the way the spec is played and where most of your damage is meant to come from, which, as we talked about just now, mostly comes from your Nightblades, mostly comes from your Shadow Strikes, mostly comes from other sources, since Eviscerate is no longer a dominant source. Which is a good thing and a bad thing, because it simply means that technically you can use DFA, and technically you can go into just about any build since there's nothing particular that makes it extra good. So you can play the original subtlety build that's spammy and just add DFAs whenever you wanted. So that's really a player choice. So on one hand, as a player, you can choose to add DFA in part of your rotation and part of your abilities, which is fun, but it kind of does fuck with the original build and the original goal of that build. So that is something I'm gonna state. So in my end conclusion, is DFA a good ability? On its own, I'd say it's pretty good. It's pretty fun, it's an interesting ability, it just doesn't really have that many good synergies right now. But on its own, it's pretty good. Should you use Death from Above? I don't think you should really be using Death from Above if you're pushing some high-rated arenas and trying to improve as a player in terms of rating. But if you just want to do some casual BGs, maybe some casual arenas, you know, maybe 1600, 1800 arenas, I could see DFA work out there as well. It currently is not the greatest ability in terms of just functioning with how the other specs it was, and I would just believe the structure of the specializations in Warlord's General, for example, was simply better suited for Death from Above. Because I feel like the devs kind of were thinking, what if the players were to use Death from Above? While I believe that in this expansion, there was basically worked on the rework for all the classes, not exactly how all the towns would be functioning with those classes. So this is really my video for Death from Above. Take it or leave it, and let me know if you guys will actually try it, or even if you do use it to this day, and with which spec do you like using Death from Above. My name is Outlaw, and thank you guys so much for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed, and I'd love to see how many of you guys actually use Death from Above. Thank you guys so much for watching. I'll see all of you in the next one.